I think optimism is what you need, for sure.
There are few times in a year as hopeful as sowing.
And if you are ready, then there's plenty of reason to be optimistic. It's exciting. There's opportunity to say that the year could be great.
It's not without worry.
Absolutely, there is a reason why my father is bald.
At Lilliput, near Rutherglen in Victoria's northeast, James Russell is planting wheat and canola. If the season goes to plan, these seeds will contribute to an almost 60 million tonne winter crop, forecast to be Australia's third largest on record, and a key driver in what this year is expected to be a $91 billion agriculture industry. Australia-wide, farming is on track for one of its highest value years, but this fifth-generation farmer says the spoils won't come without risk.
Where my grandfather was farming, sort of where I got sort of a lot of my knowledge from, he often spoke about sort of the costings of things way back then. Sort of that $1 to make $2. That was the margin, you know, you put $1 in to make $2. Whereas now, what we're seeing on a net profit scale, we're sort of seeing $10 to make 11.
The cost of inputs such as seed, fertiliser, fuel, land and labour mean farmers like James rely on being paid well for their outputs, in this case, crops.
We are looking at around $1,400 a hectare gross margin to actually produce a crop nowadays. If we don't receive those higher outputs, we've got a big bill to fit at the end of the year.
It's the difference between what's going in and what's coming out of a farm business that shows why farm productivity really matters.
We look at productivity in two ways. We kind of look at it in the sense of, well, how much more output are you getting from a given set of inputs, or are you getting more output from your already existing use? And so how do you organise the farm? How do you use your machinery? How are you using your seeds? How are you using your knowledge as a farmer to produce output? And if you can produce more than what you did before given that given set, we say your productivity is growing.
But in a sign that the National Farmers Federation says should be ringing alarm bells, Australia's farm productivity rate is barely growing at all. The annual rate in the 80s and 90s was 2.2%. Today, it's closer to 0.5%. Jared Greenville from the Australian Bureau of Agricultural and Resource Economics and Sciences says farming's productivity rate has been falling for more than a decade.
Productivity has slowed and the average rate's been about 0.6%, and that's kind of put us back in terms of our relative to international competitors, where they're getting stronger productivity growth. Now, the thing with that is that despite them getting stronger productivity growth, they're starting from a lower base than we are.
In the decades before 2010, the rate was supercharged by increased mechanisation, switches to bigger tractors and rotary dairies, for example, as well as major trading changes, such as deregulation.
After nearly 2 decades, the floor price scheme has been buried under a stockpile of 5 million bales and a $3 billion debt.
Really the game was up.
We saw producers shift out of wool production, and we saw the sheep flock fall from over 120 million sheep to about the 70 million we see today, and a massive shift of that land and those operations into cropping. And so we saw the cropping industry become more productive because they could grow in terms of scale of production. We see it also in dairy, where we saw after deregulation there's been a reduction in the amount of milk we're producing. But across the dairy farms, we saw productivity increase as the smaller farms exited and the bigger farms could become bigger and get more productive.
Clearly, a competition policy that works should be driving inefficient farmers out of business, not efficient ones.
Farm consolidation is a major driver of productivity. This take from the Landline archives indicative of the rate of change.
I had an ambition in 1953 when I got married to milk 40 cows, and that would have paid my farm off, reared my children, bought me a new car every second year, and I thought that was a pretty good position to be in, to milk 40 cows.
When Simon Scowen started dairy farming in the Bega Valley 30 years ago, he was milking 80 cows. Today, on this farm at Wingham on the New South Wales mid-north coast, he's milking 800.
Yeah, definitely forced to be more efficient. Yeah, yep. Yeah, so we're producing a lot more milk now than what we did, 10, 20, 30 years ago. Per cow production's only increasing.
But dairy farming has one of the poorest productivity rates in Australian farming today. In the 40 years to 2010, dairy farming had an annual growth rate of 1.9%. In the years since, that rate dropped to basically zero. But a closer look shows a two-speed industry, with some thriving while others lag. Simon says he's boosting productivity on this farm by putting his herd under a roof.
These cows are free range, free range cows. So the way we've designed the shed is we've got the feed on this side, we've got the shed in the middle that basically they can lie down and relax, and then we've got the gates that open to the paddock on the north side. So at night time we'll see them, about 80% of them will leave the shed and go and lie outside, but during the heat of the day, no, they want to be in the shade.
Dairy Australia says 7% of the milk produced in Australia now comes from cows in sheds just like this, a figure expected to rise.
Why do we do it? In 2019 we had the 1 in 100 year drought here. River records here date back to 1884. It was the first time the Manning River actually stopped flowing. And then at the end of 2019 we had the 1 in 100 year bushfire. All those hills behind us were all on fire. And then of course in March 21 we had the 1 in 100 year flood.
In the heat and humidity of summer, he says a cow's feed intake might drop by 30%.
And their milk production does the same thing because they just get so hot. And with our number of cows, we just can't provide enough trees for them.
But in the shed, which has fans and sprinklers, the cows expend less energy. Some feed is brought in, but most is grown on farm, making it a more efficient way of converting feed to milk. It hasn't come cheap for the farm, which is corporate owned and supplies fresh milk to a major supermarket.
Look, this is a multi-million-dollar investment. You're looking at about $7,000 a cow as an investment.
In the few months since completing the shed, Simon's already seeing an improvement.
We've seen a 20% increase in milk production. Those that have been doing it for a couple of years in Australia that we've gone and had a look at, they range from a 30 to 40% increase in cow production by putting them in this facility.
And instead of having the cows graze these paddocks, he's growing higher yielding feed crops.
So we trebled production on our river country by doing that.
At Lilliput, mixed farmer James Russell has a mixed response to farming's falling productivity rate.
It does surprise me a little bit as a grain grower. It doesn't surprise me as much as a sheep producer. We've seen huge upticks in technology, huge upticks in our ability to grow a crop bigger and better. Whereas the sheep industry, we still farm sheep in a very similar way than we did 20 years ago.
The stats back this up. Cropping's annual productivity rate is 1.6% compared to 0.5% for sheep. Low prices for wool not helping.
It costs us money to shear now. We don't actually get any return. It costs us money to get them shorn.
And what we're seeing over the long term is that real agricultural prices, so when we adjust for inflation and things like that, have trended downwards over time. And so when the product you're selling is effectively becoming cheaper year on year and you get less for it year on year, and your input costs often don't become cheaper, they either stay the same or become more expensive, the only way you can kind of square that off is by becoming more productive.
It's really about producing more with less.
Katie McRobert is from think tank the Australia Farm Institute.
Most economists will tell you that productivity comes from innovation, which sounds like a nice, easy thing to say.
She says that could mean advancements in technology or changes to farm practices.
And the application of R&D and innovation to the system is by far the most effective lever for improving productivity.
We estimate every dollar that gets put into the system, farmers generate $8 in return. Most of that through kind of productivity benefits.
R&D spending tends to benefit larger farms more than smaller ones, and some regions more so than others. So while doubling down on research spending could boost productivity, it may not benefit all.
And there's certainly the option to either look at broad economic reforms, at infrastructure improvement. That's a very big one. Often our productivity is held back by a lack of really good infrastructure that can just enable the good flow of goods around a trading system. And back in 2017, the Australian Farm Institute did some research which showed that if Australian agriculture was, for example, able to take up the full potential of digital agriculture, that'd be a $20.3 billion addition to the agricultural economy in Australia.
But Katie also has a warning.
Productivity, total factor productivity particularly, is by no means a complete measure of industry performance and shouldn't be viewed in isolation. Maybe a regional community doesn't want to see all the farms in the region consolidate and become one big farm, but maybe that's a more productive way to do it. So as a society, we need to step back a little bit from pure productivity measures and think about what it is we want to incentivise and what the goals are that we're seeking.
ABARES has found that since 2000, changes in the climate have reduced farmers' profits on average by 23%. Katie hastens any policies designed to drive productivity should include how farming uses natural capital, such as soil, water, plants and animals.
We are farming within limits. We need to recognise those limits, and we need to do that sooner rather than later.
With parts of the country in drought, others in flood, and wars and politics shaping up the global trading system, there may not be a better time for a conversation about how Australia's farmers continue to make the most of what they've got.
Because we know every farmer wants to leave the place better than they found it. They want to keep farming for generations to come. Nobody's in this for the short term. So thinking beyond a purely financial measure of productivity to something more holistic is a better way of thinking about how we farm in Australia.
It definitely feels like ag's at a bit of a turning point at the moment.